A hostel is one of the most common choices for solo travelers. Cheap, social, and usually full of people who are just passing through. Most guests only plan on using the place to sleep. They don't expect privacy, but they do expect safety. The stories you're about to hear was shared by someone who stayed in a hostel like that. A normal place, full of strangers, where nothing felt wrong at first. Before the story starts, comment where you're watching from and what time it is. Because what happened didn't start as something scary. It started as something completely normal. I was traveling alone at the time, trying to keep the trip as cheap as possible. I wasn't picky about accommodations. I just needed a place to sleep. That's why I booked the hostel. It was advertised as clean, social, and centrally located. The kind of place where people come and go without really paying attention to each other. I wasn't looking to make friends. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just needed a bed. I arrived late at night, close to 2 in the morning. The lobby was small and dimly lit, with a front desk worker who looked half asleep. He handed me a key card, pointed me toward the stairs, and told me my room number. The room was a 6-bed dorm. When I opened the door, 5 of the beds were empty. Only 1 was occupied. A guy was sitting on the top bunk near the far wall, typing on a laptop. He didn't look up when I came in, didn't say anything, just kept typing. I said a quiet hello anyway. No response. I figured he was focused or tired, so I didn't push it. I picked one of the lower bunks closer to the door, dropped my bag, and tried to settle in quietly. The room light was still on. I asked him if it was okay to turn it off. This time, he looked at me. He nodded once, smiled, but not in a friendly way. More like he was acknowledging something. I turned the light off. I fell asleep almost immediately. The next thing I remember is waking up without knowing why. The room was completely dark. No hallway light. No glow from outside. I rolled onto my side and glanced around. All the beds looked empty. Every single one. The bunk above me was empty too. I checked the time on my phone. Just after 5 in the morning. I told myself the guy must have left early. Maybe he had a train or a flight. I didn't think much of it. I closed my eyes again. That's when the bed shifted. Not violently, just enough to make the metal frame creak. Then I heard breathing, slow, close, directly above me. I opened my eyes. Hanging upside down from the top bunk was the same guy from earlier. His head was inches from mine, hair falling toward the floor. That same smile stretched across his face. I screamed and rolled off the bed. He pulled himself back up onto the top bunk and just sat there, watching me. Not startled, not angry, amused. I turned on the light and started grabbing my things, not taking my eyes off him. That's when I heard the sound of a phone camera. I looked up. He had his phone pointed directly at me. I yelled at him to stop, asked him what the hell he was doing. He laughed, not loudly, just enough to let me know he thought this was funny. I grabbed my bag and ran out of the room. At the front desk, I demanded a different room, a private one. The worker went upstairs to check. When he came back, he told me something that made my stomach drop. There was no record of another guest assigned to that bed. No name, no check-in, nothing. The rest of the trip was fine. Nothing else happened. But I never stayed in a hostel dorm again, and I still don't know where that photo of me ended up. I stayed at that hostel longer than I planned. What was supposed to be 3 nights turned into almost 2 weeks. At first, it felt practical, cheap, central, close to everything I needed. The place advertised itself as quiet for long-term travelers, which was rare for a hostel. Most people came and went quickly, backpackers, weekend travelers. But some of us stayed. The room had 12 beds, metal bunk beds lined against the walls, lockers at the foot of each one. When I first arrived, only 5 beds were occupied. Everyone minded their own business. That was the rule. I chose a bottom bunk near the middle of the room, close enough to the exit, far enough from the bathroom. I unpacked, locked my bag, and went out. The first few nights passed without incident. People came back late. People left early. The room never fully slept. Lights clicked on and off. Curtains rustled. Phones vibrated in the dark. Normal hostel sounds. By the 4th night, I noticed something comforting. My bed was always ready. No matter what time I came back, the blanket was folded the same way. The pillow was always centered. Nothing was ever on my mattress. Even when the room was crowded, I assumed it was coincidence. Maybe I was just neat. By the end of the first week, the dorm was nearly full. New faces replaced old ones, but the rhythm stayed the same. People avoided eye contact. No one talked much. No one stayed up together. It felt organized. I started noticing patterns. Every night around 1:30, the room went completely still. Not asleep. Still. Breathing slowed. Phones stopped glowing. Movement ceased. Like everyone knew the same rule. One night, I tested it. I stayed awake. At exactly 1:30, the door opened. Someone stepped inside. I couldn't see their face. They moved quietly, confidently. They stopped at the foot of my bed. I held my breath. After a few seconds, they adjusted my blanket, not roughly, carefully, like they were making sure I was comfortable. Then they moved on. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I asked one of the long-term guests how long he'd been staying. He told me almost a month. I asked if he ever noticed anything strange at night. He looked at me for a second too long, then said, "You get used to it." That answer didn't sit right. Later that day, I checked the reviews, not the recent ones, the older ones. Buried between generic comments were things I hadn't noticed before. Felt strangely structured. Easy to fall into a routine. Hard to sleep anywhere else after. One review mentioned that the beds felt assigned. Another said, "It's easier if you don't move around too much." I scrolled further. Some reviews cut off mid-sentence. Usernames missing. No profile pictures. That night, I came back earlier than usual. I wanted to see what happened before 1:30. At 1:25, someone turned off the overhead lights. No announcement, no discussion. At 1:30, the door opened again. This time, I watched. It was the same person. I recognized the jacket. They went bed to bed, straightening, adjusting, checking. When they reached an empty bunk, they paused. Then they wrote something down. A clipboard. I sat up. They froze. Slowly turned their head toward me. Then said quietly, "You're not supposed to be awake." My chest felt hollow. I asked who they were. They smiled. Said they worked there. Said it was their job to make sure everyone stayed comfortable. I asked why there was no mention of that. They tilted their head and said, "Most people don't ask." The next morning, my bed had a tag on it, a small laminated number. It hadn't been there before. I packed immediately. As I left, I noticed something chilling. All the occupied beds had tags. The empty ones didn't. At the front desk, I asked how long people usually stayed. The worker shrugged. Said some guests came back. again and again, because it was hard to sleep anywhere else once your body adjusted. I left the hostel that morning, but even now, months later, I still wake up at 1:30. My body expects something. Sometimes when I make a bed, I catch myself folding it the same way. Tight, precise, ready. And I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, there's a place that still remembers where I belong. I didn't plan on staying long at that hostel, just 3 nights. That was the idea. I was passing through the city on my way somewhere else, and I needed a cheap place to sleep that didn't require much thought. The hostel had good reviews, nothing flashy, nothing alarming. Most people described it as quiet for a hostel, which sounded perfect to me. When I checked in, the front desk worker told me I'd be in a mixed dorm, 8 beds total. He said it casually, like it was nothing. When I opened the door to the room, only 3 beds were occupied, mine included. The others were spread out across the room, backpacks tucked underneath, shoes lined up near the wall. No one spoke when I walked in. That wasn't unusual. Hostels are like that sometimes. People pretend not to notice each other. I picked a lower bunk near the corner and unpacked quietly. That first night was uneventful. I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion and unfamiliar surroundings. I woke up a few times, but only because of normal sounds. Someone turning over, a zipper, a phone vibrating. Nothing strange. The second night was different. When I came back to the room around 11, everyone was already there. All the beds were occupied now. A guy I hadn't seen before was sitting on the top bunk directly across from mine. He was watching something on his phone with headphones in. He glanced up when I entered, held eye contact a little too long, then looked back down. I tried not to think about it. I showered, changed, and climbed into bed. At some point during the night, I woke up with the feeling that someone was looking at me. Not a noise, not a movement, just that sensation. I kept my eyes closed and listened. The room was quiet. Then I heard breathing, not snoring, not the uneven breathing of someone asleep. Slow, measured. It was coming from above me, the top bunk. I opened my eyes slightly. The guy from earlier was leaning over the edge of the bed, looking down at me. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't blinking either. I froze. After a few seconds, he pulled back. No sound, no apology, just disappeared into the darkness above. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, he was gone. His bed was empty, no backpack, no shoes. I asked one of the other guests if he knew who had been staying there. He looked confused. He said that bed had been empty when he arrived. I didn't push it. I told myself maybe he checked out early. That explanation didn't feel solid, but it was easier than the alternatives. That day, I noticed something else. Every time I left the room, the door was closed behind me. Not locked, just shut. Even when I was sure I'd left it open. I started paying attention to small details. My bag was always in the same position when I came back. My charger was always neatly coiled. My shoes were aligned, too neatly. On the third night, I stayed out later than usual. When I returned, the room was dark. Everyone appeared to be asleep. I climbed into bed quietly. Minutes later, I felt movement. The mattress above me dipped slightly. Someone had climbed into the top bunk. I stared at the underside of the bed frame, my heart pounding. Then I felt something brush my arm. Light, intentional. I pulled my arm back instantly. Nothing else happened. No laughter, no sound. I stayed frozen until morning. When I woke up, the top bunk was empty again. That was when I checked the locker area near the door. One locker was open. Inside was a bag I didn't recognize. I stood there staring at it, my stomach tightening. Before I could think about what to do, someone spoke behind me. "You shouldn't touch that." I turned around. It was the guy from the second night, standing in the doorway, smiling. I asked him if that was his bag. He nodded, then said something that made my blood run cold. "I just move around a lot at night." I left the room immediately. I went to the front desk and asked if I could switch rooms. The worker looked at the screen and frowned. He said there was no record of that guest. No name, no passport, no payment. He told me if I felt unsafe, I should leave. So I did. As I walked out, I felt eyes on my back. I didn't turn around. I didn't stay for a refund. I didn't report it. I just left. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't what someone does. It's realizing you were the only one they were interested in. You probably noticed something about these stories. None of them start with danger. They start with practicality, a cheap place to sleep, a temporary stop, a shared space that isn't meant to matter. That's what makes hostels different. No one is supposed to stay long. No one is supposed to pay too much attention. Everyone assumes the risk is low because the stay is short. But all three of these stories have something in common. In the first one, the problem wasn't the building, it was the access. In the second, it wasn't a single moment. It was the realization that someone else had always been there. And in the third, nothing was technically wrong at all. The place just worked a little too well. What makes hostels unsettling isn't the people you see. It's the routines you never question. Who knows when you come back? Who notices when you don't? Who moves through those rooms after the lights go out? When a place is designed for strangers, no one feels responsible. Not the guests, not the staff, not even the building itself. And that's where things slip through. Because when everything feels temporary, it's easy to ignore patterns. It's easy to stay quiet, to mind your own business, to assume someone else will notice if something's wrong. Until you realize someone already did. If you've ever stayed in a hostel, you've probably felt it. That moment when the room goes quiet, when everyone settles at the same time, when it feels like the space knows more about you than it should. And if you haven't stayed in one yet, just remember, the bed might not be the only thing waiting for you.